15 years ago, my car died 3 miles outside of town, on a night when the October air was colder than it should have been. I stood there on the empty road, Michael sleeping in my arms, and cursed under my breath at the timing. The engine had given one last wheeze before cutting out completely, leaving us stuck with darkness settling over the cornfields that stretched on both sides. Sarah's voice came back to me as I looked at those tall stalks, all her warnings about the king of the field, the rules she'd learned from her grandmother, the stories I'd brushed off as small-town folklore designed to keep kids from wandering into the crops at night. Local superstition, I'd called it. Old wives' tales meant to add mystery to an otherwise boring farming community. But standing there with my 10-year-old son sleeping in my arms and no other choice but to walk home through the cornfields, those stories felt less like harmless tradition and more like warnings I should have taken seriously. The dirt path cut straight through the field, a narrow corridor between walls of corn that rose well above my head. I'd walked this route dozens of times during daylight hours. Sarah and I had even brought Michael here to show him the shortcut to town. In the sun, it was just a convenient pathway. Now, with darkness pressing in on all sides and the corn stalks rustling in a wind I couldn't feel, it looked like something else entirely. Michael moved as I changed my grip on him, his small hands clutching at my jacket. He was getting too big to carry like this, but I wasn't about to wake him up and make him walk through here in the dark. Whatever Sarah's grandmother had been afraid of in these fields, I didn't want my son's feet touching this ground tonight. The first few minutes passed without incident. My boots found their rhythm on the packed dirt, and the corn swayed gently around us, creating a soft whisper of movement that might have been peaceful under different circumstances. I told myself this was just paranoia, that I was letting Sarah's stories get under my skin, when what I needed was to focus on getting home safely. Then I heard them. Footsteps behind us, soft but unmistakable, falling in perfect time with my own stride. My blood went cold as the sound registered, not the random snapping of corn stalks or the scurrying of some small animal, but deliberate steps that matched my pace exactly. Sarah's voice came back to me with sudden, terrifying clarity. If you hear something following you, keep walking. Don't stop, don't turn around, don't run, just keep moving forward no matter what. The first rule. The one she'd made me repeat back to her, even though I'd been rolling my eyes at the time. I forced my legs to maintain their steady rhythm, even as every instinct screamed at me to spin around and see what was back there. The footsteps continued, neither gaining nor falling behind, but staying perfectly synchronized with my movement. Each time I took a step, I heard the corresponding sound from whatever was tracking us through the darkness. Michael felt heavier now, my arms aching from carrying him, but I clutched him tighter against my chest. His breathing stayed deep and even, still asleep, unaware of what was happening. I was grateful for that small mercy, even as my own breath came shorter and more ragged. The presence behind us grew stronger, more defined. I could feel it watching us, studying our movement, waiting for something. The temperature around us dropped noticeably, making my exhales visible in the suddenly frigid air. The corn on both sides of the path began to rustle more violently, as if something large was moving through the stalks, just out of sight. Every fiber of my being wanted to look back. The urge was overwhelming, physical in its intensity. My neck muscles twitched with the effort of keeping my head turned forward and my shoulders bunched with tension. Whatever was behind us felt evil in a way that made my skin crawl, hungry and patient and utterly inhuman. But Sarah's rule held me. Keep walking. Don't turn around. The footsteps grew closer, and I swore I could feel breath on the back of my neck. Hot, rank air that carried the smell of decay and turned earth. Michael moved in my arms, making a small sound of discomfort, and I realized my grip on him had become painfully tight. I forced my hands to relax while maintaining my forward pace, counting my steps to keep from losing control entirely. 112, 113, 114. The corn rustled more aggressively now, stalks bending and snapping as if something massive was pressing against them from within the field. The sound came from both sides of the path, surrounding us with the promise of things moving just beyond the edge of my vision. I kept my eyes locked straight ahead, focusing on the distant glow of town lights that seemed impossibly far away. The footsteps stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the sound had been. I could still feel the presence, closer now, hovering just behind my left shoulder, waiting for me to break, to turn around, to acknowledge what was there. The air grew so cold that frost began forming on Michael's hair where it peeked out from under his knit cap. My legs shook with the effort of not running. Every primitive instinct I possessed was screaming at me to flee, to grab my son and sprint for the safety of the lights ahead. But I remembered Sarah's voice again, the serious way she'd looked at me when explaining the rules. Running is what it wants. Running means you've lost. So I walked, step after step after step, while something inhuman breathed down my neck and the corn stalks thrashed around us like living things. Michael remained mercifully asleep, his small body warm against my chest, the only real thing in a world that had suddenly become a nightmare. The lights of our house appeared ahead, growing larger and more defined with each step. The evil presence stayed with us until the exact moment my boots hit the gravel of our driveway. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, the footsteps vanished. The heavy feeling lifted. The corn went still. I stood there shaking in our front yard, Michael stirring awake in my arms as normal October air replaced the unnatural cold that had surrounded us in the field. The porch light Sarah had left on felt like a beacon of salvation, warm yellow light that pushed back the darkness we'd just escaped. That night, after putting Michael to bed and checking the locks on every door and window, I sat at our kitchen table with a notebook and pen. My hands were still shaking as I wrote down every rule Sarah had ever told me about the king of the field. All 5 of them, word for word, exactly as her grandmother had taught her. Keep walking. Don't turn around. Don't respond to voices calling your name from the corn. Don't look directly at anything you see moving between the stalks. If you find something on the path, step over it and keep going. Rules I'd dismissed as folklore just hours earlier now felt like the only things standing between my family and something that defied explanation. I'd felt it hunting us in that darkness, patient and hungry and utterly inhuman. Whatever lived in those cornfields, it was real, and it was waiting for someone to break the rules that kept it at bay. The next morning, I walked back to where we'd left the car, following the same dirt path through the cornfield in broad daylight. The corn looked normal now, just tall stalks, heavy with ears ready for harvest, swaying gently in the breeze under a clear blue sky. But where we'd walked the night before, I found marks in the soft earth between the rows, deep furrows that looked like something massive had been dragging itself through the stalks following our path. The impressions were too large and too wrong to have been made by any animal I could name, and they ran parallel to the dirt road for nearly the entire length of our walk home. I never dismissed Sarah's warnings again. The engine gave one final wheezing cough before dying completely. I sat there in the sudden silence, gripping the steering wheel as my headlights dimmed and then cut out entirely, leaving me in darkness 3 miles outside of town. "Come on," I muttered, turning the key again. Nothing. Not even the grinding sound of a starter trying to catch. After 15 years working as a mechanic, I knew a dead engine when I heard one, or in this case, when I didn't hear one. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. Almost 11 p.m. Emma had warned me not to stay so late, but we'd gotten caught up watching movies on her couch, and the evening had slipped away from us. Now I was paying for it, stuck on the empty county road with October air coming through the truck's worn weather stripping. The phone showed 2 bars of signal. I could call Dad, wake him up, ask him to drive out here and pick me up. but that would mean explaining why I'd ignored every piece of advice he'd ever given me about traveling at night during harvest season. It would mean seeing that look in his eyes, the same troubled expression he'd worn ever since that night 15 years ago when our car broke down in almost exactly this spot. I climbed out and popped the hood, even though I already knew what I'd find. The engine was completely seized, oil pressure warning lights still glowing faintly on the dashboard. This wasn't something I could fix with the tools in my truck bed. This was a tow job, a new engine, weeks of work I couldn't afford. The cornfield stretched out on both sides of the road, tall stalks making noise in a wind I couldn't feel. In the distance, the lights of town looked impossibly far away, tiny pinpricks that might as well have been stars. Between me and home lay the same dirt path Dad had taken that night, the shortcut through the cornfield that cut the walking distance in half. I'd heard the stories my whole life. Mrs. Henderson's grandson, Tyler, who disappeared 3 years ago after his friends dared him to spend Halloween night in the cornfield. They'd found him 4 days later, alive but changed, speaking in languages that didn't exist and drawing symbols no one recognized. The hunters who'd gone into the corn to track a wounded deer and came out days later with no memory of where they'd been, their clothes torn and their eyes empty. Old Pete Martinez, who swore he'd heard his dead wife calling his name from between the stalks every October since she'd passed. Local folklore, some people called it. Small-town ghost stories meant to scare kids away from the crops at night. I said them under my breath as I locked the truck and pocketed the keys. The metal felt cold against my fingers, colder than the October night should have been. Dad always said the king of the field was most active during harvest season, when the corn stood tall and thick enough to hide things that shouldn't exist. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Did you make it home okay?" I typed back quickly. "Truck broke down. Walking home. Don't worry." Her response came immediately. "Michael, no. Call your dad. Don't go through the fields." But the signal was already fading as I moved away from the road. The bars dropped to 1, then none, and her next message failed to send. I shoved the phone into my jacket pocket, knowing it would be useless until I reached the other side. The entrance to the dirt path looked exactly as Dad had described it, a narrow gap between towering walls of corn that seemed to swallow the moonlight. During the day, I'd walked this route dozens of times without thinking twice about it. Sarah, my girlfriend before Emma, used to meet me at the halfway point where the path curved around an old oak stump. We'd sit there talking for hours, surrounded by corn that rustled pleasantly in the summer breeze. Now, with darkness pressing in from all sides and the stalks whispering secrets I didn't want to hear, the path looked like something else entirely. The packed dirt disappeared into shadows within a few feet, and the corn rose so high above my head that I couldn't see the sky. It was like standing at the mouth of a tunnel that went through something more dangerous than farmland. I checked my phone one last time, watching the screen dim as the battery conservation mode kicked in. No signal, no way to call for help. No choice but to trust in the rules that had kept Dad alive and hope they'd do the same for me. The first step onto the dirt path felt like crossing a doorway into another world. The first 20 minutes passed without incident. My boots found their rhythm on the packed dirt, and the corn swayed gently around me, creating that familiar whisper of movement that had never bothered me before. I told myself this would be fine, that I was just being paranoid because of all the stories I'd grown up hearing. Dad's experience was 15 years ago, different circumstances, different night. Then I heard them. Footsteps behind me, soft but deliberate, falling in perfect time with my own stride. My stomach dropped like a stone as the sound registered. The image of Dad's face flashed through my mind, that haunted expression he still wore sometimes when he looked toward the cornfields at dusk, the way his voice had shaken when he first told me what had followed him and hunted him through this exact path. I forced my legs to maintain their steady rhythm even as every muscle in my body screamed at me to spin around, and see what was back there. The footsteps continued, neither gaining nor falling behind, staying perfectly in sync with my movement. Each time my boot hit the dirt, I heard the corresponding sound from whatever was tracking me through the darkness. Keep walking. Don't turn around. The first rule burned in my memory as I fought the overwhelming urge to look back. My breathing became shallow and rapid, but I kept my eyes locked straight ahead, focusing on the faint glow of town lights that seemed impossibly distant. I started counting my steps to keep from losing control entirely. 143, 144, 145. The footsteps grew closer, and I could hear something large moving through the corn stalks parallel to the path. The sound came from both sides now, stalks bending and rustling as if something massive was pressing through them just beyond what I could see. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, fingernails digging into my palms hard enough to hurt. The temperature around me dropped without warning. The mild October evening vanished, replaced by a bone-deep cold that made my breath visible in sudden white puffs. I watched the fog curl away from my lips, trying to focus on that simple reality instead of the growing presence I could feel closing in behind me. The footsteps were so close now I could almost feel them through the ground beneath my boots. My neck tingled with the sensation of being watched, studied, hunted by something that had all the time in the world to decide when to strike. The corn rustled more violently on both sides of the path, stalks bending and snapping as if something enormous was pressing against them from within the field. I imagined I could feel breath on the back of my neck. Hot, rank air that carried the smell of decay and overturned earth, just like Dad had described. My shoulders bunched with tension as I fought to keep my head turned forward, counting steps faster now to maintain my sanity. 178, 179, 180. Then I heard it. A low, inhuman growl that seemed to come from just inches behind my left ear. The sound went through my bones, deep and wrong in ways that made my skin crawl. It wasn't the growl of any animal I'd ever heard. It was something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist but was breathing down my neck and waiting for me to acknowledge its presence. I bit down hard on my tongue, tasting blood as I forced myself not to cry out. The metallic flavor grounded me, gave me something real to focus on while that thing circled me like a predator testing its prey. The corn thrashed around us now, violent movements that suggested something massive was moving through the stalks on both sides, keeping pace with my stumbling walk. The footsteps suddenly stopped. The silence was worse than the sound had been. I could still feel the presence hovering just behind my shoulder, closer than ever, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to turn around or run or call out, anything that would mean I'd lost, that I'd given it what it wanted. Running is what it wants. Running means you've lost. Dad's voice repeated in my memory as my legs trembled with the effort of not sprinting toward the distant lights. My whole body shook from the cold and the terror, but I kept walking, step after step after step, while something inhuman breathed down my neck, and the cornfield came alive around us with movements I refused to acknowledge. The presence stayed with me, patient and hungry, testing my resolve with every step. But I didn't turn around. I didn't run. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead and followed the first rule that had saved my father's life 15 years ago, trusting that it would save mine too. My count had reached 212 when I heard my name. Michael. The voice drifted from somewhere deep within the corn to my left, soft and familiar, carrying the same gentle tone Mom used when calling me in for dinner during those summer evenings years ago. The sound hit me hard, stopping my breath mid-exhale as recognition flooded through me. Don't respond to voices calling your name from the corn. The second rule crashed into my consciousness, wrestling with the overwhelming urge to answer that beloved voice. My lips parted involuntarily, the word mom forming on my tongue before I clamped my jaw shut hard enough to make my teeth ache. I forced my boots to keep their steady rhythm on the packed dirt, counting steps again to anchor myself to something real. 213, 214, 215. Michael, sweetheart, I need you to come here. The voice called again, more insistent now, carrying that note of concern Mom got when she thought I was hurt or in trouble. It sounded exactly like her, down to the slight rasp she'd developed after years of calling instructions across the farmyard. Every instinct in my body told me to turn toward that sound, to seek out the comfort it promised. I squeezed my eyes shut for 3 steps, then forced them open again, keeping my look locked on the distant town lights. The cold that had settled around me grew deeper, going through my jacket and into my bones until my teeth wanted to chatter. I bit down on my tongue again, using the sharp pain to fight against the pull of that voice. Movement flashed in my peripheral vision, something tall and wrong moving between the corn stalks to my right. I caught glimpses of it through gaps in the thick stalks, a figure that seemed to stretch and bend in ways that made my eyes water. It moved parallel to the path, keeping perfect pace with my stumbling walk, staying just far enough away that I couldn't make out details even if I dared to look directly. Don't look directly at anything you see moving between the stalks. The third rule held me as surely as chains. I kept my eyes forward, fighting the sick feeling of wrongness that came from whatever was pacing me through the corn. The shape of it hurt to see, even in quick peripheral glances. Too tall, too thin, bending in places where nothing should bend, moving with a liquid grace that belonged in nightmares. Michael, please, I'm scared. The voice changed, becoming Emma's soft plea, carrying the same shake it had held the night she'd called me after her car accident last spring. The words pulled at my chest, making me want to protect her, to rush toward danger if she needed me. I could picture her face, pale with fear, those eyes wide with panic as she called for help. But Emma was safe at home, probably asleep by now after texting me to be careful. This wasn't her voice, no matter how perfectly it captured every tone I knew by heart. I pressed my lips together until they hurt, refusing to let even a breath escape that might count as a response. The tall figure in the corn moved closer to the path, near enough now that I could see it swaying between the stalks like seaweed in a current. Dark fabric or skin, I couldn't tell which, moved and flowed in ways that made my stomach turn. I pulled my eyes back to the center of the path and kept walking. 241, 242, 243. Son, where are you? I'm here to help. Dad's voice now, carrying that steady tone he used when teaching me to change oil or replace brake pads. The voice that had guided me through scraped knees and broken hearts, that had told me the rules that were keeping me alive right now. Hearing it twisted something deep in my chest, because part of me wanted badly to believe he'd come looking for me, that he was somewhere in the corn ready to lead me home. But Dad was asleep in bed 3 miles away, tired from a long day at the garage. He'd taught me these rules for exactly this reason, so I wouldn't be fooled by voices that sounded like the people I loved most. I dug my fingernails deeper into my palms and forced my legs to keep moving. The voices continued calling, rotating between the 3 people whose words could reach me most easily. Mom's gentle concern, Emma's scared pleas, Dad's comforting strength. Each one perfectly captured, each one designed to make me break, to make me turn toward the sound and acknowledge the presence that was hunting me through the darkness. I walked on, counting steps and breathing through my nose, while the corn moved violently around me and something wrong paced me through the stalks. The temperature kept dropping until my breath came in thick white clouds, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't afford to slow down. Then I saw it lying across the path ahead. A dark shape sprawled motionless on the dirt. As I got closer, my blood turned to ice water. It was a body, wearing jeans and a gray flannel jacket identical to mine. The figure lay face down in the exact center of the path, blocking my way forward, arms spread at unnatural angles. Even in the darkness, I could see the usual pattern of oil stains on the jacket, the same ones that decorated my own clothes from years of working under car hoods. If you find something on the path, step over it and keep going. The fourth rule burned in my mind as I approached the thing that looked exactly like me. Every rational part of my brain wanted to stop, to kneel down and check if this person needed help, to understand how someone wearing my exact clothes had ended up unconscious in the cornfield. But rationality had no place here. This wasn't a person. It couldn't be. I slowed my pace but didn't stop, stepping carefully to the left side of the path as I prepared to walk around the obstacle. The shape didn't move, didn't appear to breathe, just lay there like a discarded mannequin dressed to look like me. My skin crawled as I lifted my right foot to step over its outstretched arm. The thing twitched. Just as my boot passed above its hand, the fingers spasmed and the head turned slightly toward me. Through the darkness, I caught a glimpse of my own face looking back at me. My eyes, my nose, my mouth, all arranged in an expression of desperate pleading. "Michael," it whispered in my own voice, "don't leave me here." I jerked my foot down on the far side and kept walking, my whole body shaking now as I fought not to look back at the thing that wore my face and spoke with my voice. Behind me, I heard it moving, rustling against the dirt as it tried to follow, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't turn around. The footsteps started again behind me, closer than ever, with a dragging sound that made my skin crawl. The voices kept calling from the corn. Mom, Emma, Dad, and now my own voice joining them, all pleading for me to stop, to help, to notice what was hunting me through the night. I walked faster, my boots hitting the dirt in a rhythm that was almost panic, when something small and dark came out from between the corn stalks to my right. A black cat, no bigger than a house pet, stepped carefully onto the path and began walking beside me. Its fur seemed to soak up the moonlight, creating a patch of darkness that moved smoothly. But its eyes glowed with an inner light that had nothing to do with reflected light. Green fire that cut through the darkness around us, old and knowing and completely fearless. The moment the cat appeared, everything changed. The voices calling from the corn grew quieter, losing their urgency and their power to reach me. The footsteps behind me slowed, and the dragging sound stopped completely. The heavy cold that had wrapped around me like a blanket began to lift, replaced by something that might have been warmth, or at least the absence of that unnatural chill. The cat walked beside me calmly, its tail held high and its green eyes looking around the corn with quiet watchfulness. I could feel the evil attention that had focused on me starting to fade, pulling back like a tide going out. Whatever had been hunting me through the darkness was still there, but it no longer seemed quite so interested in its prey. The black cat walked next to me, totally calm, its small paws making no sound on the packed dirt. I kept my eyes ahead, following the rules even now, but I could see it at the edge of my vision. A patch of total darkness that somehow felt safer than any light. The voices calling from the corn got weaker with each step, their desperate pleas losing the power to reach into my chest and twist my heart. The footsteps behind me slowed, then stopped completely. The dragging sound that had made my skin crawl disappeared into the natural rustling of corn stalks in the evening breeze. Whatever had been hunting me through the darkness was pulling back, going deeper into the field, like something that had lost interest in prey that was no longer alone. I realized I was breathing easier. The bone-deep cold that had wrapped around me like a burial shroud was lifting, replaced by the normal October chill I'd felt when I first stepped onto the path. My shoulders relaxed, tension flowing out of muscles that had been tight with terror for what felt like hours. The cat looked up at me once, those green eyes catching some invisible light and reflecting it back like tiny emeralds. There was intelligence there, old and knowing, completely different from its small house cat appearance. It looked ahead again and continued walking, tail held high with confident ease. As we moved toward the distant glow of town, something bothered me. A feeling of knowing that had nothing to do with seeing cats around the neighborhood. I tried to place it, sorting through memories while my boots found their rhythm on the dirt path. Then it hit me. The garage, 3 years ago, when the hydraulic lift had failed while I was underneath the Morrisons' pickup truck. I'd heard the mechanical groan, seen the lift start to drop, and thrown myself sideways just as 2 tons of metal crashed down where my head had been. Standing up with scraped palms and ringing ears, I'd caught a glimpse of black fur disappearing behind the tool cabinet. The construction site last summer, where I'd been doing electrical work on the new grain elevator. I'd reached for a wire I thought was dead, my fingers inches from contact, when a black shadow had darted across my field of vision. I'd jerked back instinctively, looked down, and realized the wire was live with enough current to stop my heart. In the corner of the site trailer, green eyes had watched me for just a moment before vanishing. The frozen pond when I was 16, where I'd wanted to test the ice near the deep end. I'd taken 2 steps onto the surface when something small and dark had shot across the ice in front of me. The cat had looked back once with those unmistakable green eyes before disappearing into the reeds. I'd backed off the ice, and 3 days later Jimmy Patterson had fallen through in that exact spot, nearly drowning before the fire department pulled him out. How many times? How many moments when danger had been just ahead and a black cat had appeared to redirect my attention, to make me pause or step back or think twice? The cat walking next to me now felt like the same presence I'd glimpsed throughout my life, always watching from a distance, never approaching, never making contact until tonight when I needed protection most. The realization should have been unsettling, but instead, I felt a strange comfort. Whatever this creature was, it had been looking out for me for years. We reached the edge of the cornfield where the dirt path met the gravel road leading into town. The cat stopped at the boundary, sitting back on its haunches and turning to look over its shoulder toward the darkness we'd escaped. Its fur stood up along its spine, not with fear but with some kind of old awareness, as if it could see things in that black ocean of corn that human eyes couldn't detect. I stopped too, following its look back toward the field. The corn stood silent now, just tall stalks heavy with ears ready for harvest, swaying gently in the night breeze. No voices called my name. No footsteps copied mine. Whatever had hunted me through those rows was either gone or waiting for the next traveler foolish enough to walk the path after dark. The cat looked up at me once more, those green eyes reflecting something that might have been satisfaction, then padded away into the tall grass beside the road. I watched it disappear into the shadows, already missing its presence. My legs felt shaky as I walked the remaining distance to our house, adrenaline leaving my system and exhaustion taking its place. The porch light shined warm and welcoming, and I'd never been so grateful to see something so ordinary. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, the metal still unnaturally cold against my fingers. Inside, I checked all the locks twice, then sat at the kitchen table and stared at my hands. They were scratched from clenching my fists so tight that my fingernails had broken skin. The taste of blood from biting my tongue stayed in my mouth. Physical proof that the last hour hadn't been some stress-induced hallucination. I climbed the stairs to my room, every muscle in my body aching like I'd run a marathon instead of walking 3 miles. My clothes smelled like corn silk and that strange, cold air that had surrounded me in the field. I stripped them off and shoved them into the hamper, then fell into bed without bothering to set an alarm. Sleep came immediately, deep and dreamless, the kind of exhaustion that shuts down conscious thought completely. I woke to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window and the sound of birds chirping in the oak tree outside. Normal sounds, safe sounds. I lay there for several minutes, letting the memory of the previous night settle into something I could process without my hands shaking. The clock on my nightstand read 8:30. I'd slept for nearly 9 hours without moving, my body recovering from terror the way it might heal from physical injury. Downstairs, I could hear Mom moving around the kitchen, the sounds of breakfast preparation that meant the world was still normal and right. I pulled on jeans and a clean shirt, then padded downstairs in bare feet. Mom looked up from the stove where she was scrambling eggs, her face brightening when she saw me. "You're up early for a Saturday," she said. "I thought you'd sleep until noon after staying so late at Emma's." "Couldn't sleep," I said, which wasn't exactly a lie. I'd slept fine once I got home, but the hours before that had been anything but restful. "Your father already left for the garage. Mrs. Patterson's car is making that grinding noise again." Mom slid eggs onto a plate and handed it to me. "Did you have trouble with the truck last night? I thought I heard you come in pretty late." "Engine died about 3 miles out. Had to walk home." I sat at the kitchen table, suddenly ravenous. The eggs tasted better than anything I'd eaten in weeks. Mom frowned. "You didn't walk through the field, did you? Your father always says—" "I know the rules, Mom. I followed them." She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Those rules exist for a reason." I finished breakfast quickly, eager to get outside and check on something. Through the kitchen window, I could see our front porch clearly, but I needed to look with my own eyes to be sure. I stepped outside, coffee mug in hand, and there it was. The black cat sat on our porch railing, cleaning itself in the morning sun. Its fur looked soft and ordinary in the daylight, just a normal house cat except for those amazing green eyes. It looked up as I approached, watching me with calm interest. I knelt down beside the railing, setting my coffee mug on the porch boards. The cat stopped cleaning and tilted its head, studying me with that same old intelligence I'd seen in the darkness. "Are you hungry?" I asked. The cat meowed once, a surprisingly normal sound after everything that had happened. I went back inside and returned with a bowl of milk and some leftover chicken from last night's dinner. The cat jumped down from the railing and came toward the food without hesitation, settling down to eat with delicate, precise movements. I sat on the porch steps and watched it eat, understanding finally clicking into place. This creature had been watching over me for years, appearing whenever danger threatened, disappearing once the moment passed. It had walked beside me through the darkest stretch of my life, giving protection against things that shouldn't exist. The cat finished eating and looked up at me. I extended my hand slowly, palm up, not sure if it would accept the gesture. After a moment's consideration, it stepped forward and rubbed against my fingers, purring softly. Its fur was warm from the sun, completely normal except for the way it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Thank you," I whispered. The cat purred louder and bumped its head against my palm. It understood. Somehow, it understood everything. As I sat there petting the soft fur of my unexpected guardian, I figured out that some protections in this world were as old and mysterious as the dangers they guarded against. The rules Mom's grandmother had passed down weren't the only things standing between us and the darkness that lived in the cornfields. Sometimes protection came in forms we never expected, watching from shadows, waiting for the moment when rules alone weren't enough. The cat settled beside me on the porch steps, still purring, and I felt safer than I had in years. Whatever lived in those cornfields would always be there, patient and hungry, waiting for someone to break the rules that kept it at bay. But I wasn't facing it alone. I never had been. I had followed the rules, and they had saved my life. But I'd also had help from something that understood the old dangers in ways humans never could. Together they were enough to see me through the darkness and bring me home.